Throughout history, there have been many brutal battle tactics used by different armies, but some of them stand out as being particularly nasty, even by the standards of war. Here are 5 of the most brutal battle tactics ever used. The Romans weren't just a highly disciplined fighting force, they were also highly adaptable, and nowhere was this more evident than in their siege warfare. The Romans would often lay siege to a city by building a large mound of dirt around it, gradually suffocating the defenders and forcing them to surrender due to lack of food and water. But their most brutal tactic was reserved for when the siege was nearly over. The Romans would launch a final assault, killing everyone inside the city except for one person. That person would then be put on display as a warning to other would-be rebels. The Mongols were known for their incredible military prowess, but few tactics were more terrifying than their use of psychological warfare. When the Mongols laid siege to a city, they would always send a letter to the inhabitants giving them an ultimatum. If the city fell after the siege, all the men would be put to death and the women and children would be enslaved. But if the city surrendered before the siege was complete, the inhabitants would be spared. However, there was a twist. The Mongols would invariably break their word, killing everyone in the city regardless of whether or not it had surrendered. This not only served to terrorize the general population, but also discourage cities from making any sort of deal with the Mongols. During the 19th century, the British Army used a brutal tactic known as the concentration camp. During the Second Boer War, the British military rounded up born civilians and forced them into these camps where conditions were so dire that thousands of people died from disease and starvation. The goal was to force the Boers to surrender by making an example of their families. It was an incredibly effective tactic, as the Boer leadership was forced to negotiate with the British, despite the camps being a clear violation of international law. In 2003, the U.S. military invaded Iraq and quickly found themselves in a quagmire. The Iraqi army was dug in and prepared to fight a long war. So the Americans came up with a new tactic, Operation Shock. And this involved a massive bombing campaign designed to break the Iraqi military's will to fight. The plan was to drop thousands of bombs on Baghdad in order to terrorize the population and cause mass casualties. While the bombing campaign was eventually successful, it is hard to argue that it was also a war crime, as many of the bombs fell on civilian targets. One of the most underhanded tactics in the book is the use of poisoned weapons. And during the 1800s, the French military took this to a new level with the introduction of the vermin god. This weapon consisted of a hollow needle filled with a deadly poison that could be shot from a rifle. The idea was that a single soldier could now kill an entire group of enemies with just a few shots. But the vermin god was never used in combat, as it was eventually determined that the poison could also kill the person firing it. For more on brutal tactics, watch